Welcome to History Edge, for teachers, by teachers. This is a History Teachers Association of Victoria podcast that supports history teachers to promote content understanding, skill development, and a passion for history in their students. I'm Lauren Trotter, and today we'll be exploring student stuckness. For this, our first ever episode, I'm joined by Victorian history teacher and HTAV presenter, Maddi Schmidt. Hey, Maddi.
Hi.
How are you going?
Yeah, not too bad. Yeah.
Hanging in there with this remote teaching and learning?
I'm very toasty in my UGG boot.
Excellent.
I'm not sure about putting on actual shoes next week when we go back.
Yeah, that's going to be a bit weird. Now, I have to admit, in doing research for this podcast, as all podcast hosts should, I learnt that you have previously been mistaken for a student while at work.
Oh yeah, more than once.
More than once?
Yeah. Even when I presented at the HTAV student lectures, I walked in and they said, "Oh, which lecture are you wanting to attend?"
Oh,
I was
no.
like, I'm the lecturer.
Oh, I love it. That is fantastic.
I'm like, I turn 30 next year and I think I'm still getting asked for ID when I go to the bottle.
Excellent. Yeah, I can relate. I am also in my early 30s, and I've only been teaching I'm in my fourth year now, and for the first 3 years, the same colleague has mistaken me for a student at least once a year.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
I have year 12s who regularly say if I was wearing a uniform I would match them.
I love it. It's fantastic. All right. So, Maddi, can you tell our lovely listeners a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm a history teacher. I've been teaching for 6 years. 2 years at an Islamic school in the north of Melbourne, and the last 4 years at a Catholic school down in the southeast suburbs. So both sides of Melbourne.
Very broad, yeah.
Yeah, well, when I was a graduate and I was looking for a job, and they were hiring maths and science teachers, and I was history and English, I went where the job offers were.
As all good teachers will, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I went in thinking I was interviewing for a middle school position, teaching year 9, and when they offered me the job, they were giving me a full VCE load.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
Baptism of fire.
my first year I taught year 12 history, year 11 lit, and 2 year 11 English classes. I was the only history and lit teacher. So
Oh, wow. I hope you had someone there to mentor you or guide you through that very confronting first year.
Yeah, I did. And he's actually teaching history back again this year for like the first time in ages, and he's going, "Okay, now you're my mentor."
Lovely.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And so then I've been teaching revs ever since, and then I kind of fluctuate in and out of the different year levels of English as the schools need me. I joke that English is my bread and butter, and that history is actually why I became a teacher.
I think that's fair enough. Definitely.
And yeah.
All right. Well, today we're addressing the issue of student stuckness, or getting held up in a way that limits their success and enjoyment in the history classroom, which I'm sure all of us will have come across at some point in our teaching lives. There are so many different ways that we could explore this issue, but over the next 20 minutes, we've decided to zoom in on two different but oh so common forms of stuckness. Stuckness with organising and understanding content, and stuckness with getting ideas down on paper. Sometimes I have observed in my classroom students, they're looking at their board or at an activity that I've said or a page in their book, and they're squinting their eyes and perhaps frowning a little bit, and you can see that they're doing their very best to just get that content knowledge together, the big picture, and put all the pieces of the history jigsaw puzzle together, but it's not working. Is this something you've come across?
Oh, absolutely. And especially when they look at a question and they read it and then they read it again, they're like, I'm still not sure what it's asking me to do. And that's where I'm like, get out your pens, get your highlighters. I'm like book listing highlighters every year, and then stressing if you come to my class without highlighters, just go to Officeworks today because you need them. And let's actually unpack what the hell this question is asking.
So how do you use the highlighters to support students in doing that?
Well, that's where I'm very visual, and I have to carry almost a big tub of text with me to class because every different word gets like a different annotation. So we will look at a question and it says, explain what, blah, blah, the checker we're doing in Russia. and then you break it down and go, okay, what's the keyword here? And they go, oh, well, checker, that's the topic. I'm like, yeah. And anyone is just going to tell me everything that they know about the checker, and they're going to word vomit on the page. And you're going to go, okay, cool. You'll probably get half marks for that because you've showed me historical knowledge, but you haven't answered the question. And so that's where we circle the checker and we say, okay, this is everything we know. We get our word vomit out on the page and we scribble everything. And then with a different color where it says the role they played in Russia, we underline that. And then we look at our word vomit and we go, okay, which bits actually address that part of the question? And that's where we start to go back in and we highlight which bits link to what the question is actually asking. And then from there, you start to draw your plan about how your 3 ideas also about how it's actually answering the question.
Fantastic. I love how you're not limiting their thinking from the starting point, and they can just get everything out on paper in front of them, and then they can pick which bits they want to keep. I feel like,
Oh, but that's exactly the way I worked when I was in high school and in uni.
yep, for sure. I love it. What else have you tried that seems to work to support students in these moments? Any other ideas?
I'm a massive fan of a good old-fashioned table of ideas.
A
And so
table.
when oh yeah, so like think like on a whiteboard, you draw up a whole lot of columns, almost like categories. And if you put a topic on your on the left-hand side, so you might say World War One, and then you put above the top all the things that they need to know. So you might say, okay, one column, dates. The next column, statistics of deaths. The next column, brief, like one sentence summary, what it is. Your next column might be a primary source, what someone said about it, and then the next column might be what a historian has said. And then what I do, like for every dot point that they need to revise or they need to know for that area of study, I put those all the rows. And then I send that to the students and I go, okay, fill this out. And somewhere along the way, one of the cheekier or smarter kids figures out that, Miss, if I say World War One, 1914 to 1918, with 4.6 million men, but only 6.5 million men, 4.6 million bullets, da 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 da. Okay, that's what you've been teaching us to do with our paragraphs. Like that's how you want us to write our sentences. That's very cheeky of you, miss. And I'm like, yeah, I know. That's why I do it. So I essentially get how I want them to structure their sentence, like the pattern of their sentence and the pattern of their paragraph, and then I just put it in a table so that they are filling this in, like filling the gaps. But then I go, okay, now when you write your sentence, work across the table.
That's great. What a great way, because I have found in the past sometimes, you get some VC students and they're struggling with things like sentence structure and ordering their writing and their paragraphs when you would probably, I suppose, hope by that point in time they had that down pat because you've got so little time to get through so much. But that sounds like a really quick, efficient, but also effective way to help them start to see how sentence structure and even paragraphs should flow. So excellent. I can't wait to try that out. I wanted to ask, which areas of revs do you tend to teach? Are you Russia, Chinese?
I used to teach Russia and China, and then when I moved to my current school, they taught France, so I moved to Russia and France. I did that for 2 years, and last year and this year I've gone back to China because I'm experimenting with an idea that perhaps students will feel more confident doing 2 communist revolutions together. Um, while the French Revolution is amazing and it's so cool and interesting, it's a massive hurdle to get students over. And in a mixed ability school where I have students who, are really, like that beautiful, gifted, I've picked revs because I'm really strong. Then also I've got that, it's just really interesting, miss. I'm never going to read the textbook, but I'm going to pay attention. That's where I'm like, okay, maybe we need to move back into Russia, China, where it's, I teach it to you once, and then the second time you go, oh yeah, I've got it. I know what communism is now. Enlightenment and communism is just sometimes a little too much to get through, I think.
I'd be interested to see how that experiment goes and hear what you find at the
Yeah.
end of it. I think that sounds like a really good idea.
Yeah.
Um, some of the feedback I've had from students in the past is, in particular with China, they struggle with names.
Mhm.
Do you have a particular strategy that you use with your students to support them in getting their head around names that follow, I suppose, different letter patterns to our own?
Um, I'm a person who's really good with numbers and letters, so it's something that I didn't find an initial challenge, but I just make sure that I only use one set of names in every document. Um, and I use pinyin so that it's just straightforward. It's what the exam prefers. And I make sure that they write them down as much as possible. And I do say them phonetically. I know it's probably culturally insensitive, but it's so that they can, spell it correctly. I did have a student who last year kept saying Yannan because she was emphasizing it with this really Aussie ochre accent. I was like,
Yep.
but that's not even how you spell it correctly. It's Yannan, like with the apostrophe afterwards. She's like, yeah, but it's Yannan, miss.
Oh, oh dear.
No.
Yep.
So
Oh, I
I
suppose
just
that's one of the beautiful things about history, sort of an opportunity to explore those cultural differences and sensitivities that we all need to be aware of.
yeah, but I don't think that there's anything wrong with a good old spelling bee in the middle of a history class, or just because the year 12s doesn't mean that you can't test them on this. An examiner loves seeing a historically correct title of something. We just get a little bit gushy when we see it, like, oh, yay, the student did it.
And what about with Russia, with dates and calendars? Do you find students struggle with that at all?
They do, but I encourage them to chunk it thematically. So when we revise, I say you've got to do periods of time at a time. So you do up until 1905 of the early years of Tsar Nicholas's reign, and then you do the interwar years between 1906 to 1914 as the reform years, and then you have the reform. I do the same with area study too, and I'm a little bit cheeky here, and I kind of insult any married person, and I apologize to any history teachers on here who um, are are listening, because what I say is that in Russia area study too, the revolution is the wedding, where you've been forced together and you got married. And then the first 6 months is the honeymoon period where everything is happy and you're learning these new things about your partner and it's all okay. The
What a
Civil
lovely
War
analogy.
is where you start to realize is that maybe things aren't that great and you start to bicker and you start to fight. And then you get to the Kronstadt Rebellion, and that's when you realize that actually you're in this for the long haul. You do love your partner, and it's a time to compromise. So we go
Beautiful
honeymoon,
story.
yeah, we go honeymoon, conflict, compromise. And then you have the long, marriage together of communism.
I love it. What a great way, the chunking to help them organize their thinking, and also a cute way to remember the different periods and events that go on.
Yeah, and then that way kids they don't feel so overwhelmed by a whole area of study of time, because they're like, okay, I'm just going to study this 6 months, 1918. Then I'm just going to study the Civil War, 1918 to 1921. Then I've just got the compromises, and that's fine because I know most of it's done by then. And it just relieves some of the stress and the anticipation of what they have to study by
When
putting
there's
it.
a light at the end of the tunnel, at the end of each chunk, it's a lot easier to get started when you can see where you're going to be able to have your next rest break.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so let's have a look at an issue that I believe a lot of classrooms are struggling with at the moment, and that is supporting students to get their ideas on paper, down on paper in a well organised manner. So we have touched on this already, but I'm curious to see if you have any more strategies, because sometimes students can have an almost instinctive understanding of how to put a piece of writing together. But for those who don't have that instinctive understanding, trying to learn to write, especially in history, can be really, really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. At the moment, I have quite a few boys who are just waffling for sentences. And when I say sentences, they're paragraphs with no full stops. Um, and I'm just going back, going, what are you saying? The first thing is short, sharp sentences. When not in English, you do not have to use flowery words and you do not have to use other words than the topic. Please use the topic in your answer and have short, sharp sentences.
Absolutely. I once had a lecturer say to me, if the word doesn't need to be there, it should not be there.
And I spend half my time cutting words out of their responses rather than adding them in.
It's very hard to get them away from the adjectives that they use in English, I think, and the adverbs as well.
Yeah, it's so ingrained. And I know I'm guilty of it when I do teach English, especially for a lot of the students who I have taught English and then they come into my Year 12 history class and they're like, Miss, this is so much easier than when you taught us English. I'm like, well, that's nice. It's going to get hard, but
It's a good place to start.
yeah. I think the other thing, and I take this idea from a teacher, Luke Gahan, I think I said his name wrong, but yeah, he got me onto this idea of power sentences, where
Okay.
for every topic, you get students to create the best sentence they can come up with. And sometimes you do this as a bit of a 10-minute writing activity where you say, okay, I want everyone to write one really kick-ass sentence on, the July days. And then you get them all to submit them into you. And maybe you pick the best one, or maybe you mold two together. And then you share that sentence to the class and then get them to put that in their bank of sentences. They then put those on flashcards and then they start to memorize that language. And so then when they're writing and they get a question and they have to embed information really quickly and they want to speed up their writing, they already have this not memorized response, but a sentence or two that has become familiar with them that they can then tweak into their answer to then respond to the question in front of them.
Absolutely. I suppose it's like having a prepared starting point. And I really think sometimes getting started is the hardest part of any writing activity. I've had students, I'll present some content, we'll have a discussion. A student might ask a question and I'll have a chat to them and they can verbalize their interpretations and their opinions to me excellently, so articulately. And then they say to me, well, what do I write? And my response is, exactly what you just said. But they find it's almost like the action of picking up the pen and putting it to the paper can be so disabling and so confronting. Do you have any ways that we can support our students getting over that, I suppose, fear?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I have been doing is not lowering my expectations, but just changing my expectations for where they are at this point of the year. Especially, I do this in the classroom where when I set a question, we always brainstorm it. But with remote learning as well, so I've been delivering PowerPoints throughout the week and I annotate over all the top of my PowerPoints. But then I also include their coursework questions. And with each coursework question, I put it on a slide and they'll only get 30 or 60 seconds of me just saying, okay, looking at this question, let's actually see what it is. And then I'll just do a quick brainstorm for them on the PowerPoint. But also when we're in class and next week we go back to school, I'm hoping that they bring all their ideas. Is when I pose that question, I write down their ideas onto the whiteboard and then I just frame that opening sentence for them. And then you give them their contention, give them the bits of their topic sentence, and then even number. Here's your contention, here's 1, 2, and 3. Now you have 20 minutes to write. And rather than giving them that free for all of go forth and conquer, they go, okay, here's my opening sentence, I've got it. And then they can clearly go forward with that. And it's just bringing their ideas down to the front. It's the same as when you do a think, pair, share and you ask them to write down their ideas before they share them with the class. Well, now we're just writing their ideas down before they write their ideas down.
I like it. Sort of a little boost up the wall that they're trying to climb over.
Yeah.
They do most of
we're
the
just
work.
giving them a little bit of
a starting push.
And I think this point in the year, that's what they need. Come September, maybe, okay, no, you should be doing the writing by yourself, but it's still early days. They're only finishing their first revolution now.
For sure. Maddi, thank you so much for sharing your ideas with us. I'm sure our listeners will be taking away some strategies that they can incorporate into their history classrooms. I really like the idea of the sentence building table and even annotated PowerPoints. All right, so we've got our last segment to do. So this is a fun little segment that we decided to include at the end of our podcast. I think we all like to learn more about our teacher colleagues, especially in the HTAV community. So here we go, Maddi. What inspired you to get into teaching?
It's a question that I still not sure I know the answer to. I think first and foremost, I loved school, and school was like ever since prep, it was this exciting place. But then, especially in high school, it was definitely like a place of refuge for me, and somewhere that I could escape, and find solace in learning, but also in history books. And it was just somewhere that I always loved being, and therefore when I knew from 5 years old that I was going to go to university. I told my mum that she had to save up to support me going to uni, not knowing that HEX was a thing. People save up for weddings and houses. No, I told mum that she had to support me going to uni. She laughed, but when I turned 18, I was like, well, I'm going to uni. And it just made sense, because I loved learning, and why would I not continue learning? So then I wanted to continue sharing that learning and that love of learning.
I think I'm just going to chime in for myself as a teacher. I decided I wanted to be a teacher when I was in grade 2 because I thought I would have a tidier desk than my grade 2 teacher, and her messy desk really, really annoyed me. But I can definitely relate to the love of learning and the wanting to share that love of learning and make it exciting and engaging, and yeah, definitely can relate there. All right, what is one thing you would like new history teachers to know as they are starting out?
They do not have to have all the answers. It is absolutely okay to not have read the textbook back to front. I'm still, like, as we prep to go into China in a week's time, reading parts of Tom Ryan's textbook going, probably should have read that a few years ago.
Oops.
Yeah, but you know what? My kids got through. They were fine. Schools were happy with my scores because I was passionate and I worked at my students' pace. And sure, you will probably always have one student who is ahead of you in your notes, in your readings, and that's okay. I now challenge my kids and I say there is going to be at least one kid every year in my class who knows the revolution better than I do. I'm waiting to find out who it'll be in this class.
Which one is it?
Yeah, and I do that. And they take it on as a little bit of a challenge. And, when we get to October, I know that kid and I sit with them in the library and I'm like, so tell me about this event. I want to know more. And,
That's great.
and they thrive on that, that knowledge that, do I actually know more than her right now? I'm like, yes, you do. I teach 5 subjects. You only have history, especially when they're year 11. I'm like, you just care about this.
What a great security in that knowledge or confidence in that conversation. What a lovely idea. What do you think is your teaching superpower?
Or I think I get a little too enthusiastic about things. I'm one of the teachers said to me, he goes, I've never met someone so organized and enthusiastic. Like you just get things done. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. It's just I'm just very enthusiastic when I'm in the classroom, and if I'm having a bad day, you don't know unless I have the flu, and that's when the boys finally pick up that maybe Miss Schmidt's not okay. But I'm so enthusiastic, and then I just get things done. It inspires them to get things done, or at least most of them.
Makes sense. I'm going to put it out there, and apologies to any of our listeners who are perhaps not as equally as organised as the two of us, but I have found if you're not a naturally organised person, teaching is extra difficult.
Oh,
You've got
absolutely.
so much going on.
Yeah, no, it thrives. And I think that's one of the reasons I did become a teacher. Thinking back to, your grade 2 analogy, I remember in grade 1 just loving all the stationery options that teachers had.
Yes.
And I'm guilty of spending way too much money at Officeworks on more highlighters that I don't need. But
Have you got the pastel ones?
Yes.
I've just discovered the pastel highlighters.
Yeah. And my students know to get me stationery at the end of every year. That or, coffee cups, because all teachers need coffee cups and we leave them around on desks far too often.
We mark our territory with them.
Yeah. But organisation and enthusiasm. They're probably my strengths as a person, but also my strengths as a teacher.
Lovely. Good way to be. What is the most helpful thing a colleague or member of the history teaching community has done for you?
I think it's been people's confidence. I remember when I was a graduate teacher, my mentor said, "Stop calling yourself a graduate teacher. You are an experienced teacher who knows their stuff. Own it." And then as soon as I started, you tick that box for HTAV saying, "I'm interested in doing things." And Myra just kept offering and I just kept accepting. And then, you start to question yourself, but then the history community, they've just been so supportive. And really, really experienced teachers who've written textbooks and presented for years, they've come up to me and said, "So when are you going to start writing?"
Oh, wow.
And a bit taken aback, I went, "Oh, wow, okay, well, you have that confidence. Maybe I should too."
We are so the harshest critics of ourselves, and it's so lovely when someone else can have that confidence in ourselves and we can kind of, I suppose, almost feed off that. And well, if they have that confidence in me, I should have that confidence in me.
Yeah. So I think other teachers having the confidence and taking the time to acknowledge it in front of you, that's been probably the nicest thing, because self-doubt is like such a thing. That's a terrible sentence, but it's such a burden that we take on. And I think that that's been probably the best thing.
Lovely. All right. Last one, lucky last. If you weren't teaching, what would you be doing? Now that's a tricky one.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about this. So there's a couple of options. So because of my organisation, I would be an assistant to an editor like Miranda Priestley in Devil Wears Prada.
Nice.
Or I'd be a librarian.
Oh, that would be one of my choices.
Or I'd work for like a publishing company, specifically one that published textbooks or something. Who knows? I might take a sabbatical from teaching in a couple of years' time and just go, "Hey, I want to go publish a textbook."
Think of all the reading you could do, though.
Oh my, that's what's been so good about quarantine. Just reading all the time.
I've currently got a book that I've just started, Voices of Chernobyl.
Oh.
I did not know much about Chernobyl before I watched the mini-series that came out, I think, last year, and there was an accompanying podcast as well. Quite good. Just going to give that a plug. But yeah, they got a lot of their information from this book, and it's just been wow.
Yeah, wow.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah, that's so cool.
All right, Maddi, was there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners or the history teaching community?
Hi. That's a question I hadn't thought of.
No pressure.
Just that as we move in these unprecedented times, I think that there's this overwhelming feeling that history is not valued. And I don't believe that's true. It appears that way, but really it truly is. And our students, if you give them the time, they will show you that they still find it interesting and fascinating. And more and more I'm surprised by the students who I wouldn't normally suspect to be history lovers, but who secretly adore it. And I think just give students the chance and they will show you that they do love it. But it's also the responsibility is on us to make it lovable.
Wise words there, I think. All right. A big thank you to Maddi Schmidt for joining us for our first episode, and a big thank you to you, our listeners, too. We hope you've enjoyed listening, and for more information, check out our show notes. Please give us a rating, and why not hit the subscribe button?